All right. Glory. Mark chapter 11, verse 12. Now the next day, next is really a hard word to say. Have you tried that? Next. Oh, never mind. I'm being silly. Now the next day when they had come out from Bethany, Jesus was hungry. And seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season of figs. And in response, Jesus said to it, "Let no one eat fruit from you ever again." And his disciples heard it. In verse 20, it continues the story. The next day, as they're coming by from Bethany, where they spent the night in the home of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, they came into Jerusalem again. In verse 20, it says, "Now in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to him, 'Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered away.' So Jesus answered and said to them, 'Have faith in God. For assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things which he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask, when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them.'" I'm not sure what direction this message is going to go in ultimately, but I've tentatively entitled it, "Have You Any Fruit?" It wasn't the fig season, but this fig tree, here's the deal about fig trees. When they have fruit, the leaves are in full blossom. And all the other fig trees weren't in blossom, but this one was just bright and full and wonderful, which is what happens when they have fruit. But it wasn't the season of fruit. This was like an out-of-season thing. And Jesus went looking for fruit, but there was no fruit. This fig tree was faking it. It had the signs of fruit, but when you looked in and parted the leaves, there was no real fruit. I entered the ministry in 1976. I have to do some arithmetic every once in a while. It's been a while. And it was in the midst of a revival. And we started a church. Actually, we started a little coffee house in a storefront, and within a few months we had 30, 40 people, and within a year we had bought a church building and had about 100 people. And we weren't a fabulously growing congregation like some of them in town were. You had North Heights Lutheran building new buildings all the time. You had the Jesus People Church and my old friend Randy Morrison with the Word of Faith and such. And that were really exploding with growth. But I'll wait till he's finished there. What you probably don't realize is that preaching, if you're a teacher or a preacher, you know what I mean. But if you're not in the groove, you can't preach. The Holy, anyway, so when you get distracted by people running around and stuff, it can be a distraction. Lonnie's doing something very good, I have no doubt, but it was distracting. Anyway, it was easy to plant a church and see it grow, and within a few years we had 300-400 people in that church. And like I said, we weren't the biggest church in town. They were having 2,000-3,000. But it was the time of figs, as it were. There was just fruit everywhere. You couldn't miss. I think I shared this within the last few weeks, either in Institute or here, but that I quoted one time, I said, I could stand up here, stick my toe in my mouth, bounce around on the other foot, and give an altar call, and 10 people would come forward and get saved. That may be a slight exaggeration, but it was, how many were there? People were just getting saved. You couldn't miss. There was a lot of people that were not very good leaders. There's a lot of things that were going wrong. Sin was found in the camp here and there and different churches and things like that. But it was just a time of revival where you couldn't miss. The figs were in season. All of them were blossoming, and when you reached in there, there was figs. So now it's not the fig season. God knows we're way overdue for another revival. And there have been little hints in different places, but it hasn't been a genuine nationwide and ultimately worldwide revival since back then. And so most of the fig trees don't have many leaves, but all of a sudden Jesus finds one that's in full blossom, but no fruit. A faker. A faker. It takes more serious Christianity to get things growing when it's out of season, but it can be done. Like I said, this tree looked good, but it had no fruit. Man looks at the outward appearance, and sometimes he's impressed by what he sees. And like Samuel, even the prophet Samuel, God's voice for that generation. When God said, go to the sons of Jesse and anoint the next king, he went there and he looked at Jesse's first son, Eliab, and said, this is him. I have never seen anybody who is so kingly, so wonderful, so handsome, so tall. This man puts King Saul to shame. You remember what God said? You're looking at the outward appearance. This is really difficult, I'm sorry. I should probably get a guest preacher until I get used to these things. But anyway, man looks at the outward appearance, but God says, I look at the heart. This is not the man. And within a couple of chapters, we see Eliab acting very petty and nasty and picking on his little brother and shaking in his boots because no one would stand up and fight Goliath. Eliab had a lot of great leaves, but no fruit. A friend of mine has since gone to be with Jesus. Some of you remember Jim Hafus. He was one of my best friends ever, I guess. But anyway, he began to go out with a girl from one of the larger evangelical churches in the St. Paul and area. And maybe the largest, I don't know. I haven't counted them lately. And she was a godly girl, very pretty and had everything going with her. And after a few weeks of going out, and she said, aren't you attracted to me or what? And he says, what do you mean? Well, you haven't wanted to bed me. That's my terminology. I don't know what she exactly said. And he said, no, that would be fornication. We're not married. Okay. But the next comment is what made it worse. And he says, no, I couldn't do that. He said, well, the pastoral staff here sleeps with me. Why won't you? Needless to say, I'm not going to visit that church. We need a rebirth of radical Christianity. We need to recreate ourselves if necessary. And get a hold of whatever it was back in the 70s. Excuse me, I'm not one of those, back in the good old. I want the good new days. But we had something back there that we don't have today. I remember going to the church I grew up in. I really didn't know the new pastor. They go through a lot of these churches and vote pastors in and out every couple of years. But I did meet the new pastor at one point, and we agreed that he would come to our church for our Christmas program, and I'd come to his church, which was, like I said, my home church as a child, for their Christmas program. It wasn't an evangelical church, it was a mainline denomination. I'll give you a hint, the same denomination as this church was before we bought the building. Anyway, and I went and he enjoyed our service, and I went to his the next weekend, and he got up and preached the gospel. They sang, it was beautiful, the choir was excellent. And then he preached the gospel. And I'm waiting for at the end, because I knew these people, I grew up with them. I was waiting for him to give the altar call. But instead he says, isn't it wonderful that Christ has made the way for us? And like, we're all okay. And like I said, I knew these people. She ain't okay. She's like that pastoral staff, you know. These people, by and large, were not born again. Do you remember that term? It's in the Bible, John chapter 3. And when we were getting born again and getting excited, before I came to Christ, I was just a stinking sinner. I tried to sin more than anybody else because I thought it was fun. Had kind of a wake-up call one wee hours of the morning as I hugged a toilet, begging to be able to throw up. I was so sick from having fun. But that's who I was. And then Jesus saved me. And we got radically converted. And we witnessed to everybody we saw. If my sister were here this morning, she could tell you what a pest I was. I harassed everybody who I knew. You got to get right with God. What do you want? You're not right with God. Anyway, and I'd be preaching the gospel and going, we were just crazy for Jesus. Radically saved, radically born again. The only thing we knew was Jesus. We went to the most radical church we could find, which at that time was Jesus People Church. And I was eventually ordained through them and started the Jesus People Church of St. Paul, which was Good Shepherd. But as I look around, sometimes I think, I'm not that on fire anymore. And I can blame my health, I can blame maturity. We had a meeting with a bunch of our old elders from Good Shepherd Church. Most of them had gone on to be missionaries and things like that. And one of them voiced the concern. He said, remember when and this was in the late 80s, and he voiced the concern that we used to be so on fire for the Lord, we'd have all-night prayer meetings and just this and this and this. And he said, what happened to that zeal? What happened to that fire? And he was shot down by the other elders around the table. They said, we call it maturity, not lukewarmness. And I more agreed with the guy who said, what happened to us? His name was Marty Madsen, by the way. And I I don't think it's maturity. I think we've lost the zeal. And I can't say for you, but like I said, even myself, I see this. And I'm preaching every day, or every week, and teaching, and all I do is study the Bible. That's my job. And share the gospel whenever I get a chance with somebody. And yet, I don't see that raging fire in my heart that I had back then. And I look at the evangelical churches today they're full of leaves, but the pastoral staff is sleeping with the pretty girl. We need a revival. I'm not yelling at you. Please don't misunderstand the point here. We need to get on our knees, look into our own hearts, figure out where we're at. And if you're happy with where you're at and you're really on fire for the Lord, great. But if we're not, we need to get back to biblical Christianity. Our pastoral staff is not sleeping with the pretty secretaries and such. So it's easy to point the finger at some mega church in the suburbs. But we've also been in this building for 20 years, and we haven't filled it yet. Thank God you came to church today. I looked out here at 5 minutes after 10, I thought, there's only 4 people. Clyde's already up from the basement. There's only 4 people. Thank God you showed up. But we need to pack this place with on-fire converts. Amen. Thank you. Yeah. But we can't make on-fire converts unless we're on fire. Amen. And Jamie, mentioned children and the stresses of everyday family life and all that, and it can be stressful. It can be tough. And when your kids grow up, it doesn't get any better. They just are more trouble now. Not really. Most weeks we have at least a couple of our kids here. And but somehow we got to get past the everyday troubles. What was the problem with the seed in the parable of the sower that fell on thorny ground? They were encumbered with the cares of this life. Most of the week was spent in figuring out how to make a living and going to work and taking care of the family and this and that. It's much easier to be a Christian when you're young and don't have kids. And you can go to church every night of the week. We used to. We said, they got a new charismatic Catholic meeting out in South Minneapolis. Let's go there. Oh boy, and everywhere. And now there's a church here. Now they got 3 services a week. And we're just on fire for the Lord. But then, like I said, the responsibilities of everyday life begins to weigh you down. Does anybody relate to me, or am I just preaching to myself here? We need to get back to radical Christianity. If I could come up with a program to do that, I'd give you the outline today. And like I said, some of you may be totally on fire, more on fire than you've ever been. I could paint that picture to please myself, but I know that I haven't won anybody to the Lord this year yet, and it's already March 14th. That's like a record, And sometimes Paul says you have to just sit down and examine yourselves. And it's a good thing. That's why I am emphasizing I'm not scolding you, scolding that big church in the suburbs where they all sleep with the secretary. Don't mistake me on that. But we're not that. We love the Lord. We're here because we love the Lord. And we're coming to a small, radical kind of a church when many evangelical Christians are content to sit in a huge crowd in the back rows and sneak out before they have to say hi to anybody. Come on. And yet they're good Christian people until they aren't. When that push comes to shove, and the girl says, "Why aren't you attracted to me?" I ran out of notes. I really haven't been used. I got some scribbles here, but I had a 1-point sermon and that's it. And to belabor it any further would seem like I'm scolding, and I'm not. I'm your pastor. I love you more than anything. It's true. And but I know that we're not, as a church, where we could be. And a lot of it is just the cares of this life and getting older, and we don't have the super active social lives anymore where we go to bars or something. We mostly sit home and watch reruns of NCIS. Columbo. Last night, Becky and Mari wanted to watch Rockford. And I love Rockford, but this was one of the worst ones. He was just getting socked right and left. It was always Jim Rockford getting sucker punched by everybody else. That was the theme of the show. And I just said, I'm going to throw a shoe through this television if I don't go off and read a book or something here. So I worked on my sermon. But we can do a lot if we search our hearts. Do some fasting. When was the last time you fasted? Maybe you have a regular I used to fast all the time. I haven't fasted now for many weeks. Somebody told me, I don't believe in fasting. I like to eat. Jesus said, when I'm gone, they shall fast. You can't stay in the Spirit when all you're feeding is the flesh. So fast, pray, examine your heart. Don't be afraid to examine your heart. Be mean to yourself. I'm not going to be mean to you, but I'll be mean to me. And if we do that, God will show us. I won't have a program, like I said, how to get on fire for the Lord again, but God will show each of us individually how we can be more effective for the Lord. Can you agree with me to do that? I don't want to just come to church every week and be like that church that I grew up in where the pastor preached a great gospel message, but then just assumed everybody was already right with God. And of course, he knew them better than I did and knew that that really wasn't true unless he had some really loose definitions of being right with God. Now, if you were back at Good Shepherd, you would have probably heard sermons like this on a regular basis. But here we are. Let's grow this church. Let's grow ourselves. And then growth of the church is inevitable, because we will bear fruit according to what we are. So maybe that big church in the suburbs just has leaves. Actually, we've had a couple of people who've left that particular congregation and come here, gone to Institute and things like that, and they were just amazed that we were teaching the Bible. And they were like being born again. Because that's kind of the norm now. Evangelicalism is the new standard of churchianity. The old mainline denominations, most of them are empty. Am I right? And so the mainline Christianity today is evangelicalism, which a few decades ago meant really on fire for God, really born again. Not to mention us charismatics that speak in tongues and do radical things like that. We need to maybe even start a new movement. What do you think? Really being on fire for the Lord. And they all, church wisdom, conventional wisdom is that it's the young churches that prosper and grow. And I think some of us old duffers can still change that one. Before I go to see Jesus, I'd sure like to see it happen. And everybody said, yeah, let's stand.